David, welcome to the Mea Culpa podcast. First time on, thankful to have you. So much to talk about. Need your advice, need your experience, need your wisdom. So I want to jump right in and ask you, from your perspective, what do you think are the key missteps that the Democratic Party made that allowed Trump, somebody who was twice impeached, 4 times indicted, charged with multiple different offenses, capable to reclaim victory in this election?
Well, that is a good question, and one I've thought a lot about, and others have as well. I think there's a combination of things that the history books will look at and think it were done wrong. I mean, I think one, I think clearly you need accountability for wrongdoing to happen quickly. I mean, just look at South Korea. The guy literally announces martial law, and they're already kind of going after that. Here, we allowed something that at one moment most Americans would have agreed was just terrible, January 6th, to just sort of sit there unaddressed for a very long time until Congress took it up, et cetera. And I think that really was a huge mistake. In a similar way, like politically, there's a lot, we could talk a whole hour about this, so I'll just go through a few. I do think we also allowed just the terrible nature of the Trump term before January 6th and even before COVID to get rewritten in history as if it was just fine. I mean, one of the big lies of the 2024 election was Trump saying repeatedly, oh, his policies in the economy were just fine until COVID ruined them. The truth is, in Ohio, where I'm sitting, we saw the first net loss of jobs between January 19 and January of 20, i.e. before COVID ever hit. His policies were already failing. The trickle-down stuff, the tariff sort of chaos were already failing. There were all sorts of other problems. And somehow over the course of the election, over the course of the 4 years, we sort of allowed so many of the worst parts of the Trump administration and term to get memory hold, as if it never happened, or as if it was all because of COVID. Now, he's the reason COVID was so bad, let's be clear. And he should have gotten a pass for that either. But the truth is, so many of the worst aspects of the Trump term, including economics, were failing before COVID ever hit. And we allowed that misimpression that it was fine or that COVID caused it to become seen as the reality. And so you literally had Trump leave the White House with an approval rating in the mid-30s, a disapproval rating in the mid-60s, to 4 years later go into an election where he's more popular than Biden, where the view back at his term was actually more sanguine. And so I think there's a lot of things we have to talk about, but one of them is the guy was literally on the mat. You remember when he announced his presidency, the second term kickoff, he was at some country club. No one was there. None of his family were there. He was dead in the water. And I think that we basically let him get off the mat, both as a matter of what he had done on January 6th, but also how terrible his first term was for most people. That's a very beginning of a much longer answer.
Sure. But what's very interesting is the fact that he never took credit for the vaccination. There's a lot of things that he did wrong. Yeah. Let's acknowledge, though, that under his administration, he may not have developed it, but Operation Warp Speed produced the mRNA, the vaccination for COVID-19, that despite the fact he chose not to endorse his own administration's Operation Warp Speed and the creation of this vaccination, he went the opposite direction and backed people like Governor Ron DeSantis in this bullshit mask thing that you don't need it, that it's not real. Had Mike Pence go out at a CPAC and talk about how it's not real, it'll go away. I always thought that was an interesting thing because it probably saved millions and millions of lives. And instead of embracing it and owning it, he kicked that away as if it was nothing.
Yeah, no, I actually think it's one of the most alarming things about the second term is that the thing that I actually agree with you. Now, I think he took more credit than like he probably should have, but that's who he is. But that warp speed and those vaccinations, if you look at the curve of when COVID started to be resolved, it was when those vaccines became available. And he did own that. And the idea that in his second term, he's so much more extreme than his first term. So now he's anti-vax, which is still an unpopular position, let's be clear. Now he's fully anti-vax. He's putting RFK in charge of our health. So he's abandoned, literally, arguably, as you're saying, the best thing he did in his first term that actually helped the American people. And you look back, he believed in it. He wasn't anti-vax then. He clearly was proud of it. And so that's how warped things are 4 years later, and how much more extreme he is, that even the thing that he didn't take seriously, the anti-vax stuff, his own body language and words made it clear he believed in bringing those vaccines online. Now he's abandoning even that, which means as we see things like a bird flu already looking a little bit like it's building, it leaves us in a very scary predicament if even the guy who did Operation Warp Speed is now pretending that vaccines apparently don't help anybody.
Especially when you have somebody like RFK, and we're going to get to him in a minute.
Yeah.
But you've spoken extensively about laboratories of autocracy.
Yeah.
Are there parallels between that concept and how Trump's campaign strategy played out on a national level?
Yeah, I mean, it's not only the campaign, it's I think what we'll see from government. And it's funny, man, I literally have the book sitting next to me. This is the first book I wrote, the nonfiction book. And my theory is that so much of the attack on democracy is at state level, where there is largely no accountability left in politics due to intense gerrymandering. And what we see once you have a state like Ohio, where there's essentially the legislative elections are decided before the election. I mean, the map guarantees the outcome. Most of these people, it's like Mike Johnson. They're never in an election their entire life. Mike Johnson has never been in a real election. Half of them have been uncontested. Well, what does that mean? It means they can do two things. One, they can pass really, really unpopular laws all the time, be anti-vaxxers when most Americans aren't, ban abortion when most Americans' views are the opposite, then get away with it all. That's why they love state houses. They can pass toxic things and never lose office. And number two, they can be really, really corrupt and never lose office. In a lot of these states like Ohio, we see a downward spiral where government is essentially turned into not something to represent the public good or to fight for it. Government becomes harnessed to serve private players in big corporations. And I think that model of Ohio and other red states, where literally the money goes to for-profit schools, the money goes to big utilities, big bailouts, you name it. The reason it should scare us that Elon Musk and Ramaswamy and billionaires are basically put in all these positions, Department of Education, you name it, is because what happens in these systems without accountability is government literally is no longer about public interest or public service. It's sort of a screwed up version of private service. They use public goods and public power to serve private interests. That's what's happening in states. That's why our public outcomes in states like Ohio are falling quickly. Everything from life expectancy to GDP to poverty to student debt, all the outcomes go in the wrong direction because the government in a place like this are serving the private interests and not the public interests. And the worry we should all have as we look at the federal government, and we're already seeing with these appointments, that's what's going to happen at the federal level. The federal government, if it's using this model that we see in states, will be largely using the power of government to serve private interests. And the public outcomes, when that happens, will largely fall as a result. And so a lot of people are going to suffer from what will essentially be government harnessed to serve certain private ends and profits as opposed to the broader public good.
Which is why you see on a regular basis, historically, that the party not in power during the midterm elections generally retake the House or the Senate or both. Because what happens is these types of gerrymandering, these types of unpopular policies, despite the fact that Trump won on those unpopular policies, taking credit for things like the overturning of Roe through Dobbs or anti-vax, he still managed to win. But the question I really want to ask you A lot of critics are claiming and arguing that the Democratic Party's messaging, and I'm a believer in this, I think our messaging sucks. It's often too complex, it's too policy heavy, it's too myopic. And then compare that to, for example, Trump's simplistic rhetoric, a rhetoric that continuously fits on a bumper sticker, which is what it does. My question to you is, how do we as Democrats bridge that gap and make this message, or the messages that we're trying to get out, stick with voters?
Yeah. First of all, I do agree with the first half of your comment. I do think, as down as people feel, and I feel it too, I think there could be opportunity as soon as 2026. Think about it this way: this is Trump's second term. Well, we all remember what happened in Bush's second term. Democrats had a very good '06 because the problems became clear. And I think the problems of Trump policies are about to become very clear to people. And so I do think, as much as people are down, if you've ever thought of running for a state house district, that 26 may be the year you want to be on that ballot. Because I actually think that some of the wheels may come off mid 25, that so many of Trump's sort of false promises and tariffs and other things, what they're going to do to all sorts of other things like that people care about, healthcare, veterans benefits, whatever cuts Elon Musk makes. I think people are going to see, wow, this is affecting my life. And that builds to your second question, which is we better figure out how to explain that stuff very clearly if and when, and I think it's going to be when it hits. And I think we need to get to more how all these things affect people's everyday lives. And oftentimes, I think our communication is such that we're talking, as you're saying, at a 30,000 foot level. We're talking at an academic level, or it's too complicated. I went over, this is going to sound like I'm Sarah Palin. I can see Kentucky from my office. I'm in downtown Cincinnati. Kentucky's right over the river. In Kentucky, what's called a school voucher referendum, which is the heart of Trump's education policy, lost in every county in Kentucky, even when Trump won Kentucky overwhelmingly. But the heart of what he wants to do with education, which is take public school dollars and give it to private schools, lost everywhere. And so I thought, well, it's funny, here's a state that voted for Trump. Why did they vote against his number one education policy? And I drove to the smallest county in Kentucky that voted for Trump 80-20, but also voted against this policy 76-24. And I just started asking people at the dollar store, at the gas station, hey, how come you think this county voted so against this universal private school voucher plan? And they'd say, well, I'll tell you why I voted against it. I don't think my public money should go to private schools. It was so simple.
Okay.
And everyone said the same thing. The point is, that could have been an issue that you could have over-explained or made over-complicated. But these were Trump voters overwhelmingly crushing his number one issue when they had a chance to vote on it because of a simple message. Well, why would I want my public dollars for my school go to some private school? And that's just one example. But I think, to your point, it's an example of we have to argue on very sort of straight up bumper stickers, simple messages that in a community like that had people voting. Again, they voted for Trump, but when asked about a key policy issue, they voted the exact opposite because they understood it clearly. And whether it's healthcare or education or all sorts of other things, I think we have to learn that lesson.
I mean, you're right. We're flying at 35,000 feet. Trump is flying at knee level. 3 words, as far as I'm concerned, is what brought him the victory: gasoline and groceries. That's all he had to say to people. And yeah, my gasoline is too high, even though gasoline is right now at the all-time low, right? I shouldn't say all-time low, but certainly it's super low. And groceries at an all-time high. That's all he had to do to make it stick into your pocketbook. And you're like, you know what? If this guy says he's going to change gasoline and groceries, I'll give him another shot. Why? because Kamala Harris, when asked, what would you do differently? I think that was one of the actual turnarounds. What would you do differently than the current administration, being the nice person that she is and really a fan of Joe Biden's and this administration, which of course she's the vice president of? She said, nothing. I wouldn't do anything different. So now all of a sudden in the minds of every voter, wait. So we're going to have another 4 years of gasoline and groceries? And that's what I think killed it. But I'll tell you something that I also think is problem. It's the Democratic leadership, like guys like Jamie Harrison and those that are running these various campaigns. They're running off of old playbooks. And I think that that leadership underestimates the power of right-wing media propaganda. I believe that they absolutely underestimated it. So my question to you, David, is what do you think should be done to counter it more effectively? Because CNN and MSNBC, that's not right wing. That's not enough to counter this right wing media propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to get serious about the new media environment we're in. Podcasts. I mean, the MeidasTouch, the network we're on, like that's getting huge follows, and I think people need to get smart about making sure they're not doing the traditional thing. I read something that the blanking on his name now, but the winning Pennsylvania senator, what's his name? The one from Connecticut,
Who Fetterman?
McIntosh. Was it? No, the Republican that he was figuring out that all his TV was not. It wasn't moving anything. He was buying all news. So what did he do? He bought football all the time. Last few weeks, they barely knew the guy, and now he won partly because of the top of the ticket. But the last few weeks, he went to football because people were actually watching it. As you're saying, they're not watching the news as much as they used to. If they are, maybe they've made up their mind. That was a strategy that really paid off. They found that his awareness went way up as he was buying what people were watching. But I think it's social media. I think it's podcasts. I think it's figuring out how to get more channels on the left or center out there. We know that the right is dominant. And one thing I want to say is I think the organizing of the Democratic Party needs to get down a level. So I mentioned that Kentucky situation, like that county I went to. And by the way, you would have the same experience. I spent several hours in this very Trump county. I had great conversations. And one thing I asked them about that issue they voted down was, hey, how do you know about that issue? How did you get your information? They said, people, they would say the teachers in town were talking about it. And they didn't mean the teachers union. They meant the individual teachers who they knew. They said they posted on Facebook about it and made it clear this would hurt our public school. And it makes me think that like a lot of the way that we're, quote, organizing, we've got some database in DC and we blitz from that database, phone calls and text messages.
Old school.
Yes. Instead
school
of being
playbook.
like, the people in Kentucky I talked to, they had already made up their mind before TV ads even ran. Because in the community, they had been talking about it, and the people they trusted were saying, this is bad for us. And I think it speaks to the need. This is what Obama did. He started with organizing. He had chapters in every county in the community. And so I think it's a media fix, but it also, if you're organizing so that it's ground up and trusted members of the community are saying, well, this is what this will do to our community, that's a lot more credible in this environment than, the 30-second ad that they see 100 times in the last 2 weeks. The decisions they're making are going to come more from that local conversation. And if you're not in that conversation, you're not in the game. And I think that speaks to the new chairs running for the DNC. Like, I think we have to be at a level that's on the ground enough that the units are sort of approachable. And it's not this sort of from a distance campaigning where I think most people have already made up their minds based upon the talk in the community. So I think there's a lot to do. I think it's a lot of media strategy, thinking that through. And I think it's figuring out, and by the way, one of the things, and I've been on these programs to say this, what happens when you only run in half the communities of America? Right. When you leave half the district, you're not in the community. They don't even know who you are. So you're not in the conversation. So this is also about organizing, and it's also saying, hey, we're going to, 50% of the Tennessee Republicans in 23, the ones who kicked the two Justins out, they didn't even have an opponent in November before. 50% of Texan Republicans, they don't have an opponent. Some states are doing better, but overall, if you're not running in half these places, you're not in the conversation, and last minute communications aren't going to win people over if you haven't even been in the community the entire time before that.
Yeah. Listen, you're right, and I'll tell you from a personal perspective. I reached out to when Biden was the nominee. I reached out to the folks that were running and organizing for Kamala. This Mea Culpa podcast, we've done over 500 million downloads to date. It's not nothing. I couldn't get somebody to call me back. I kept trying to tell them Kamala's message, Joe Biden's message on to counter Trump's on Biden's weaponization of the Justice Department. It's simply not true. In fact, it was the Trump administration, it was Bill Barr that weaponized the United States' Department of Justice to go after a critic. Hello, yours truly had me unconstitutionally remanded. I have all the documents. I sent them to each and every person to show them this is the real federal location monitoring agreement. Look at the ID number in the top left corner on both of the two pages. This is the fake one, the counterfeit one they wanted me to sign. No identification number. In fact, the layout wasn't even straight. It looked like somebody did it quickly on like a WordPerfect or some sort of a program. Why not go ahead and attack and say it's projection? That's all that he's doing in order to scare you. And I bring that you could not reach anybody to save your life. And I think the violation of the First Amendment to the Constitution to create the first political prisoner ever held by this country, I think that in and of itself should be a disqualifier for any president whose administration did that, and I believe did it under his nose. Which brings me to the point that I really want to bring up to you. His latest appointments, like Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, Linda McMahon, RFK, to name just a few. John Phelan, who I know for over 20 years, Lutnick, who I've known for over 20 years. These guys are not, and I'm talking about the whole lock, stock, and barrel of them, they're just not qualified for the positions that they're being offered. So my question to you is, these folks are seen by many as ideological nods to extremism and to disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. Of all of these folks that you've seen Trump nominate, who do you believe poses the greatest threat to democracy, to our nation's stability and our safety?
I think national security wise, it's clearly Tulsi Gabbard. And I worry that we're focusing on a lot of other terrible people. If Putin is watching, and he is, the one he's most excited about is the woman who has been clearly friendly to his view all these years, at the very least. I don't know. I don't want to speak to more, but there could be more, being in charge of our national intelligence. And the word, and if I were literally trying to get her in there, I would do exactly what they're doing, which is throw out a Matt Gaetz, throw out a bunch of goofy, crazy people with scandals to get them headlines so that she can kind of coast on through, and all of a sudden she's in charge of our national intelligence. I mean, that is a scary proposition. So I think national security wise, she's clearly the most dangerous. And my hope is that we get a few Republican senators brave enough to say so. We know that Musk and others are going to be put to work trying to scare people, but that's a true bigger term. I mean, here Russia's on the ropes in many ways, and the United States is about to put into place a sort of a bizarre ally of theirs in charge of our intelligence. I mean, talk about a coup. I write political novels on the side. I wouldn't even write a novel with that crazy a plot. On the flip side, I do think and I don't know which of these people you know or don't know, but like, I think the entire weaponization in terms of democracy, what they're going to be doing within the entire Department of Justice. Kash Patel, I don't know Bondi as well, but she's just a loyalist. Kash Patel, they just put in an assistant attorney general for civil rights that I just wrote about, that has spent her life doing the opposite of doing what the role of the civil rights division would have her be doing. And, these are the people who've been, Kash Patel and others, they've got their enemies lists. They've been publishing them. And I do think, you look at between Project 2025, the Supreme Court immunity decision, there are no guardrails if these people get in there to stop a round of lawfare that will be completely different than anything we've seen. So I think that entire Department of Justice, the group that'll go in there,
I want to
is
stop
very
you for a
scary.
second, because I don't think it's that we haven't seen it before. I am the proof positive
Right.
that it has
But I'm
happened,
saying
and
take
it
the
will
case.
happen again. Now it's
Yes.
going to be on a
Systematic.
scale. Right.
Yes.
If you ever worry about the safety of your home and your family, there's no better time to act. Right now. Right now, Simply Safe is extending its massive Black Friday deal for my listeners, where you can get 50% off. You hear that? 50% off a new Simply Safe security system. Simply Safe, it's the home security that I trust. I mean, I've been using it now for years, and I love, love, love the peace of mind that it brings, knowing that my home is protected 24/7. So get 50% off today just by visiting simplysafe.com/mea culpa. I mean, this is your last chance to protect your home at Simply Safe's lowest price of the year. I mean, look, when I close my door at night, I need to be able to sleep. I need to be able to sleep safely. And that's why I use Simply Safe to protect my home and my family. I mean, Simply Safe, it's a new way to protect your home that stops intruders before they break into your home. I mean, old school systems, they only take action once somebody, God forbid, is already inside your home. And you know what? That's too late. Simply Safe's Active Guard outdoor protection, it changes the game. And it changes the game by preventing crime before it happens. And if somebody's lurking around or they're acting suspiciously, those agents see them in real time. They talk to them directly. They set off spotlights, and they could even call the police before the intruders have a chance to break in. Plus, here's the nice part. There's no long-term contracts. There's no cancellation fees, and it's literally around $1 a day for all of this protection. And Simply Safe, it's extending its massive Black Friday deal for my listeners. So this week only, right now, this week only, you can get 50% off any new system with a select professional monitoring plan. So this is your last chance to claim their best offer of the year. Head to simplysafe.com/mea culpa. That's SIMPLISAFE.com/mea culpa. There's no safe like Simply Safe. And what they did, if we want to give them that type of credit, they used me as kind of the we'll call it the litmus test, right? For what needs to be done in order to violate somebody's constitutional rights, incarcerate them, and get away with it. Now, I was fortunate. I was able to file a habeas corpus petition, and Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein recognized immediately the falsity of the documents, the falsity of the allegations, including the fact that the government was lying to him about it. You go in with a lawyer in order to ask a question about a document that's violative. The very first paragraph is violative of your First Amendment rights. And next thing you know, you have 3 marshals handcuffing and shackling you and putting you back in a solitary confinement for a total of 51 days. This is not normal. This is retaliatory. But I believe that when you see a Kash Patel list, when you see a Todd Blanche list, when you see a Pam Bondi list, a Donald Trump or Don Jr. or Eric Trump or Lara Trump or any of the Trumps enemies list, I think each and every one of them have absolute reason to be concerned for their safety, their future, and their freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I wrote in a different book. They just have me on my desk where I tried to imagine what would happen if Trump fulfilled his promises. This was me hoping to convince people to not vote for him. And I have a chapter in there called the Department of Retribution. And it's about what a DOJ full of Kash Patels would look like. And I describe that as they go through the list of people they want to prosecute, from January 6th committee members like Liz Cheney to the New York prosecutor and Fannie Will and the Georgia prosecutor. They're all on the list. But then I give the flip side of what it would feel like to be one of those targets. And you know this as well as anybody. Their goal, if they get jail time, they're happy, but they just want to destroy them either way. You know, the scandalous headlines, the money they will cost these people, like all of it, that's the victory already. Even if you don't get a jury to convict or something.
Right.
So this is real. They have said it. They think it. And that's why I said this, you know, of all the different appointments, this, and again, as much as he targeted you, Barr had more hesitation than Kash Patel will have. It's like Trump was, again, he's abandoned his Operation Warp Speed. The second term will be worse. You're going to have people like Patel and others who clearly are saying, this is why I'm here, and I have no compunction to do it. I have nothing holding me back. So no, it's a very scary moment, and my hope is obviously that however we can get, you know, the handful of Republican senators who have seemingly some hesitance on this stuff to find a backbone. I think it'd be very important next couple months to keep this from happening. I don't hold my breath about it, by the way. But here's the thing.
You bring up a good point.
Go ahead.
You bring up a good point, which is about the litigation costs and the headlines and so on. You may remember when Trump sued me for $500 million in the Southern District of Miami. We never even got to depositions. I chose not to put in an answer, but to move for discovery in lieu of filing an answer. And he was supposed to sit for a deposition. He didn't show up. So then we got a court order in order to get it. There was a delay needed. His lawyer had some function that he was already obligated to, and then it got delayed again further. These delays is what really has cost the Democrats there, the White House. But when we finally got a final court order deposition date by the judge, 3 days before, he ended up withdrawing the case. That case, those motions, in order to get him to sit down on a case that he brought as the plaintiff, cost me over $300,000. How many people want to go through that? How many people can go through that? I can't. I can't. And so imagine what's going to happen to all these other people. And it's why I was yelling from the rooftops as much as I possibly could that this is danger. I do want to ask you, though, because
let me say real quick, though. Really, they don't hide this stuff. What did Trump want from Zelensky? He on that phone call, he wanted a publicly announced investigation. For them, that's the victory. And I put this in this book. I have a prosecutor saying to another one, hey, don't overcomplicate this. Remember, the president's top priority is publicly announced investigations. Right-wing TV repeating the words treason and abuse of power in every segment. That's the victory, meaning the whole taint, the shadow cast on the person, the months or years of going through the investigation, not knowing what you're like, that's a torture in and of itself. And if you look at how Putin and other autocrats act, it's the public announcement of the investigation that is the goal. If ultimately they get to a trial and all that, that's gravy. But the sicking the DOJ on people, just the investigation itself, that's why what's funny is, the old mindset of the DOJ is we only bring a case if we know a jury will convict. The Trump Kash Patel mindset isn't that. It's, oh, we just want to smear and ruin their life. We just announce the investigation and then drag it out forever and ruin their life. And that's my worry, is that's the mindset we're about to have at the DOJ, with Trump sort of demanding it.
Well, that's what they did to me, and that's
Yeah.
it's sad. It really is sad. I want to just move for a second, because I also think that one of the biggest issues that this country is going to have to face is, given, RFK Jr.'s, and I've had him on this podcast, his history of being an anti-vaxxer, the rhetoric, the disinformation, the fact that he makes claims that measles, mumps, rubella, polio vaccinations to children is what's causing autism. This is all inaccurate information. My biggest fear is that what happens when another pandemic comes about and you don't have individuals there doing like what they did even under the Trump administration with Operation Warp Speed. It won't be 1 million Americans deceased. It'll be many more than that.
Yeah. No, it's a real fear of mine. I mean, my first fear was you just simply get unqualified hacks in these jobs. But worse, now you have anti-vax, anti-science hacks. And by the way, don't forget too, going back to this warp speed thing you talked about, Trump spent almost one of the most common parts of Trump's stump speech, and we'll see if he does this, was that schools would not get federal funding if they had vaccine mandates. And he wasn't just saying COVID, he was saying all vaccines. So Trump himself was trading in this stuff. He puts RFK there. Obviously, the biggest risk again is still, another pandemic type situation. And we're already seeing, bird flu is already, I think a child got it the other day. They couldn't even track it it came through the food system, it looks like. So no, it's a very scary situation. And Trump, again, I mean, if they act upon this school promise, and my hope is Trump gets cold feet on that, because let's be clear, as we said at the very beginning, most Americans are not anti-vax. They
No,
still
they're
think
not.
it's nuts. And so I think Trump has enough of a sense of what is politically popular that he may even get cold feet over some of the craziest promises. Let's hope. Because if they do what they're saying, if RFK acts out his anti-vax ideology, if Trump acts upon his schools can't have vaccine mandates, which is insane, yes, things will turn upside down very quickly. And one of the knock on wood, one of the most positive parts about COVID was that children largely did not get sick. As a father of two young kids, like, you bring into America something where the kids are the first to get sick, and you've done what they've said around schools. You want to talk about a true crisis. That's when people will truly, panic, when their own kids are getting sick or worse. It's a scary scenario. And again, let's hope that that people push very hard on RFK at the confirmation hearing. I've seen a few Democrats say, "Hey, there's some things I like about RFK on other things." I'm like, fine, bring those up without mentioning his name. Like, the idea that there may be a few things you agree with him on, with all this crazy stuff. If you think food needs to be more safe and secure, just say it. Don't give RFK right now any credit when so much of what he would bring to America is a disaster.
Yeah. So I want to just move on to a different topic, because even though it relates to it, right, we're talking about different ideologies that are coming in. And Trump has, and this is not an old ideology of his. I don't even know where he picked it up from, to be honest. This tariff ideology, this America First tariff that he keeps talking about. My question that I want to ask you is, why is it that we as Democrats cannot get it through people's minds that this will drive up the cost for American families? That tariffs are not going to make so much money that nobody will be paying taxes any longer, that it's going to put America into a even more dominant financial position than we already are. that all of the tariff money that's going to be collected, and the way that economists have calculated it, is that it will ultimately be 175% increase per good based upon the movement of that item from its original sourcing to the consumer. It'll be 175% increase in the price. Why could we just not get that message across? I can't tell you how angry that it made me when I saw that the number one most Googled question after the election was, what is a tariff?
Yeah. I hate this. In this case, I think that the sad answer is going to be that people are going to have to see it to believe it. But I think it's a fair criticism. Wasn't there a way to communicate it so people would have seen it before? One thing I have to say, and again, you and I could spend hours trying to understand, since you've seen Donald Trump up close, and most of us haven't. I think Democrats sometimes they just are sort of passive about their ability to change thinking on things. So we'll see a poll, Democrats, just say Democrats, and it'll say something like, oh, tariffs aren't polling that badly. People kind of like them. And so there's a decision made, well, we shouldn't talk about them. If you had done a poll in 2015 about building a wall in Mexico, it would have been a terribly performing thing. But Donald Trump doesn't care. He just decides to pick a topic and to keep talking about it. And he knows that if you do it the right way, you can actually move the needle, even if the initial poll, which is sort of a reaction to that moment in time, doesn't make you realize you can move the needle. And I think sometimes Democrats are so sort of beholden to the thinking at that very moment they take the poll that they don't think through, I could actually maybe, if I talked about things a certain way, change minds as opposed to simply living with where minds already are. And I think, not to compliment him, but I think Trump actually has shown that. He's taken things
brilliant
that were
marketer. Look, we can say whatever
toxic.
we want negative about Donald.
Yeah.
Say whatever you want negative about him. But anybody that turns around and says that he is not a master branding marketer, because you're right, he took something that makes no sense at all.
And he makes it popular.
And not only does he make it popular, they say it so many times, like in the old Stalin days. You repeat the lie over and over and over again, the lie becomes the truth.
Yes.
All right. Tariffs are good. Tariffs are not good. If Donald Trump turned around and said that a spoon is a fork, or that a watermelon is really a grape, these people would turn around and say, wait, it's a grape. It's not a watermelon.
Yeah.
Right? Or it's called a spoon, not a fork. He can actually change people's mindsets, which I think is really his superpower.
But the point is, others can too, but often they'll say, well, it doesn't look like that's the winning issue. Let's not talk about it. So, because it doesn't, the polling doesn't. And so I think Democrats are often captive to that moment. They don't think they have agency to change anything. Here's an example from the not so distant past. When Obama said he was for marriage equality, it changed the feeling of it. It actually did. It moved the curve. And so I think sometimes the Democrats, when you're sitting there frustrated, I think it's because somewhere the research told them, well, this is not a winning issue, and say they don't have the Trump attitude, which is, well, let's make it one. Let's actually figure out how to make it one. And we should figure out how to do that better if we want to do better.
Sure, but there's a major difference here. When you're talking about marriage equality, you're talking about something very different than talking about tariffs, right? And changing. If Donald Trump turned around tomorrow and said, eating 6 Oreo cookies a day will prolong your life, you can have every scientist, every doctor, you can have every single person on the planet turning around and saying, no, it will end up increasing your cholesterol, it's with saturated fats, or whatever the cookie may be. I shouldn't pick on Oreos because I love Oreos, right? But, people would go out and they would start buying it in droves, right? I mean, they would say, well, Donald said that it's good to prolong life. well, therefore it does. He has that ability, even though you know that it's not healthy for you. But if we want to go and start talking about bizarre comments being made, and somehow, I couldn't believe this one. He started calling the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, governor, and referring to Canada as the 51st state. Now, while that's widely being mocked online as just batshit sort of crazy, he wants to annex Canada, and I've said this all along, by the way. If he's watching Putin take Ukraine, if he's watching Putin then move in and take or try to take Poland, and then at the same time you have Xi Jinping in China, in Beijing, going after Taiwan, why will Trump, who will copycat, why will he not take over Mexico and Canada? And why will our borders now no longer need walls? We'll have shoreline. Why would he not do that? So when all of a sudden he starts talking about Canada's our 51st state, I started getting thousands of DMs saying, holy shit, you were right. My question to you, how do offhand comments and remarks like this, how does it influence our international diplomacy and America and our global image?
I mean, obviously, it makes a mockery. I mean, how he talks about NATO, how he talks about the Canada one. But the thing about that one that to me really sticks out, and Trudeau just learned it, like Republicans have refused to learn it for 8 years. Trump sees, he loves when people kowtow to him. They think they're getting somewhere by doing that. But what they're doing is convincing him that he owns them. And the people who always, when Mitt Romney had that dinner with him, and you saw the look on his face where he had, he had been against him and he gave in. When the senators quit and give in, when JD Vance goes and kisses the ring, they don't win. They just open the door to be like his person. And Justin Trudeau, by flying to Mar-a-Lago, did that for the whole country, for his whole country. And it's not a coincidence that right after Trudeau thinks he's sort of breaking bread and
Right.
making progress, that's when that happens. And so I've watched since 15. Like, when will people learn that by caving to a bully, he wins, and he feels like he owns you once you've caved? And the only people who don't get owned are the ones who stand up to them. As painful as that may be, long term, you're better off standing up. And even if you're the head of a country, if you let yourself get bullied, as Trump is now doing on Twitter, you let your whole country get bullied. And so I just think that lesson is clearly, from watching him from a distance, his mindset is, when people cave to me, that's when I've won and I own them. And I don't understand, whether it's Republican senators, House members, or others, why they don't figure that out. They always lose. And
Yeah,
now Justin
it's true.
Trudeau has his entire country being mocked because he thought it'd be a good idea to go brown nose at Mar-a-Lago. The last thing you should be doing.
Yeah, and what he was hoping, obviously, to get out of it is Trump turning around and saying that he's not going to impose tariffs on Canadian goods coming into America, i.e., lumber, steel, natural gas, etc., because that's a big part of their gross domestic, product. Well, yeah, he made a massive mistake. Half my family live in Toronto. Well, and I heard from my cousins, they were like, well, we may soon have American passports. And I was like, yeah, and so many of them are just not fans of
Oh, it's
Trudeau
humiliating.
because,
And
yeah,
Trudeau invited it all. He invited it all. I mean, everyone from Lindsey Graham to Marco Rubio, JD, I mean, they all do the same thing. And then they're owned.
yeah,
And they're owned forever. Because my other theory is, once you cave, you forever have compromise on you. You forever cut the deal. You'll never get out of it. Don't cave the first time, because once you cave once, you're done. And that's been what's happened again and again and again to everyone who's caved to him.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, not caving, it hurts. It hurts in
I
every
agree.
way,
I get it.
emotionally,
I
physically,
get it.
mentally, financially. He got, he's got that ability to
I get it.
really
Yeah.
inflict pain. And you know what? You're right. With people like Kesh Patel and now,
Yeah.
Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. And so I don't understand this whole Doge scenario. Some people call it doggy, right? I'm not really sure. It's, to me, it doesn't make, first of all, it's not a program. It's not an agency. You got two guys, including one who's the richest guy in the world, running around Washington with his kid on his shoulders, meeting with senators and Congress members and governors and dignitaries, meeting with them, talking policy, talking ideology, figuring out what they can do to knock off 1/3 of our country's annualized budget, and to do so where they don't think that there's going to be a negative impact. For example, one of the things they said that they want to cut is veteran health benefits. That's $119 billion a year. Now, of all the things that I talk about, this is the one that really gets me the most. You ask these people to go out, to risk their lives, to defend our Constitution, our democratic republic, our ability to be America. And many of them come back with both physical and mental scarring. And now you're telling them, fuck you? That, sorry, right? But government efficiency says that there's just too much fraud, waste, abuse. And while we appreciate your sacrifice and your service, you're going to have to figure this shit out on your own. And I still, again, don't understand how that could even be a topic to raise, let alone how there's a single veteran out there that would vote for that and vote for this party. And they did, though. Okay, I need to tell you about Tommy John. When you wear Tommy John, as I am right now, you're much more comfortable, so you can do everything better. Like, do this ad. I mean, it's time to up your game with Tommy John underwear. Tommy John's stylish underwear has dozens of comfort innovations. So, for example, they have a supportive contour pouch. They're breathable, lightweight, and they have moisture-wicking fabric with four times the stretch of competing brands. These are just a few of my favorite things about Tommy John. I love it, and I know that you will too. With over 20 million pairs sold and thousands of 5-star reviews, guys everywhere love their Tommy Johns. So here's the thing. I've been trying different brands of trunks for years, and none of them are even in the same universe as my Tommy Johns. Tommy John fabrics, they keep you 2 to 3 times cooler, and they dry 4 to 5 times faster than regular cotton, which makes them perfect for travel. So go right now and shop Tommy John right now for huge savings and get 25% off your first order at TommyJohn.com/Cohen. Save 25% at TommyJohn.com/Cohen. See site for details.
Yeah. And that was literally written in Project 2025. I mean, they talked about it. So imagine so one thing, I have a Substack, it's David Pepper. And one thing I've decided to do is to keep a record every day of the crazy stuff happening. Because it's easy to forget how crazy it is. Imagine if 100 years ago, the president at the time had put Rockefeller in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. The richest man in the country is going to be the one with no real qualification to tell us how to run our government efficiently. And by the way, we're going to see, like we described at the beginning of the show, we're going to see government money going into private players from Doge. I guarantee it.
Mhm.
People will use this as an opportunity to enrich. When they say cut, sometimes the cut will be offloading things for the private sector to do, like they want to do around like weather and things like that. But the entire world we're talking about here, where the world's richest man is now running around, as you said, with senators telling them how to make government more efficient, the everyday Americans, whether it's Social Security or veterans benefits, will pay the price for it. I guarantee the well-off won't. It's all upside down, and it's so much it's kind of hard to keep up with it. But that's one reason I'm trying to sort of document it. If you remove the names and describe in the politics, and you just describe it neutrally, it almost makes it more clear how crazy it is. Like the
Yeah.
world's richest man is is being tasked with making the American government he basically bought through the campaign more efficient. It's just nuts. And you would
Yeah.
think that
Well,
it's so nuts that at some point the American people would see that's not what we thought we were voting for, and we want to change it as quickly as possible.
okay. So, as a proof that this concept, this ideology is batshit crazy, just look at the assassination of UnitedHealthcare CEO by Luigi Mangione. That act by this young man sparked this massive national debate that's going on about the anger towards corporate greed. There's something there. He had back surgery, the whole bit. His life had been changed, whatever. He couldn't be the 27-year-old that he is, whatever. And what not, I am not condoning his actions at all, but it has sparked a national debate about the anger towards corporate greed towards healthcare in this country.
It has.
So my
Well,
question to you, how do you interpret this act? Is it symptomatic of some deeper societal unrest? And what happens? What happens when stuff like this gets even worse for most Americans if, in fact, this America First ideology, that Project 2025 ideology, actually kicks into play?
well, I'll give another example. The Ohio Supreme Court just yesterday tossed out a massive settlement with pharmacies over the opioid crisis and saying they basically can't be held accountable for. We have Republicans talk nonstop about fentanyl, opioid, but they're writing laws so that in Ohio, this massive settlement where the dollars would have flowed to communities to deal with the death and addiction from the opioid crisis, the Ohio Supreme Court, paid for by big business, interpreting a law paid for by big business in Ohio, ruled yesterday no settlement. You have no ability to hold those companies accountable. And it's just and yes, this is a crisis. It's cost thousands and thousands of lives in Ohio. And everyday Ohioans were just told by this sort of Republican court, sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. So the anger is out there, and I think that again, this goes back to your question at the very beginning. When this is a corporate driven issue from the very top, Democrats need to figure out how to, I don't condone killing either, obviously. But how do you not convert that anger into winning on election day against the very
Right.
people that are doing all this stuff? And I think the challenge for Democrats in the coming, and I think the clarity of how bad this is about to become more clear. This Supreme Court decision by Ohio, my guess is around Ohio, people are saying, what? We can't even hold them accountable for killing our communities? Um, People need to figure out very quickly how to effectively turn that into not violence, but actual a political movement that starts to overturn it. And my guess is, let's say Musk does this stuff with veterans. Let's say, other problems continue. My hope is that, going back to the very beginning, that people running for office can actually, let's say the tariffs do what we think they're going to do. Um, the hope is, as we've seen happen in the past, midterms go the other way. There's a way to channel that pain that people will feel
Hmm.
into politics that lead to winning in a couple years.
Yeah. So let me ask this because the hour goes by very quickly. You're right.
Yeah.
I can ask you a million more questions. I mean, things that don't make any sense at all. I mean, Trump, for example, he's attacking Gen Z voters. He calls them lazy and misinformed. It seems like a pretty stupid strategy to me, right? Given their growing influence in elections, their growing size, that ultimately they will be the largest, if not already, the largest voting bloc out there. First of all, I think that we as Democrats should be seizing on this. But the real question that I just want to ask you, taking all of this that we spoke about and more, what's the one warning that you would give Democratic leaders right now to avoid another loss in 2028 or in 2026? What should Democratic leaders right now be doing in order to ensure Democratic victories in 2026 and then 2028 instead of sitting there and moping about our current loss?
Yeah. There's a lot of short-term stuff we could say, but I think maybe the most dramatic is don't just go back to the same old strategy of looking at the 3 or 4 swing Senate races you need to win as if that's winning. We've got to, because I think when you only are kind of engaging at that highest level, you're not really talking to, you're not getting the communities. So I'd say the biggest mistake would be to just say, okay, we've got 3 or 4 major seats to win at this high level, and that's how we win, and that's all we do. And that will lead to continuing to be out of touch. And so I would say is get to the ground. When Obama won in '08, and there were headlines about how the Republican Party was dead, Karl Rove had a state level based strategy, and he went for state house districts all over the country, including where Obama had won. And
Mhm.
look what happened in 10. They already turned it around. When Bush won twice, Howard Dean said 50 states were going to the ground all over, and it worked. So I think the adjustment has to be, if going to that more local level, that state house level, has been the consistent path for parties who have lost to come back, make that decision now. And I think a lot of the messaging will come from the fact that you're on the ground and listening to people as opposed to trying to figure out, in DC. So I think going to the ground and learning from where comebacks have actually emerged consistently, doing the same thing isn't just a good strategy politically. It will make you listen better, and it'll make you communicate better about all the issues we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you very much for your time, for your wisdom, making us a little bit smarter today. Tell us real quickly your Substack and your most recent book.
Yeah, so I'm at you can go to Substack at David Pepper. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky at David Pepper as well. I've written a bunch of these books. This book may be too much for folks. This is sort of projecting what would happen if all the things that Trump said he would do happened. I wrote it a few months ago. Sadly, a lot of it's already happening. The anti-vaxxer being in charge, the DOJ being weaponized. But to your point, one other piece of advice I give everybody is we got to take it all seriously. You'll be better prepared for what's going to come if we all think about what they're going to do and don't have our head in the sand. So that's my most recent book. But if people want a little bit more of a positive, I do have a book called Saving Democracy, which is about what are all the things that people can do at a time like this to make a difference, practically speaking, where they are. I talk here about how we have to run everywhere, for example. So those are just a couple. But if you sort of like what I've been talking about, Substack, about every day I put something out. So go there.
Thank you, David. Appreciate you. And I'll definitely be speaking to you again very, very soon.
Okay. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.